a more ambivalent status, but it had somehow still a very grounded status, as far as I can imagine. So on the one hand, you may recall the Soviet phrase, like Soviet critique, and it was like, they would say, like the government would say, so when you are three people, you must disperse because there's too many of you, so you have some sort of, let's say, subversive quality when you are a lot of people. So a lot of people gathered in a neighborhood, that's already subversive, so you should not do it. It's on the one hand, but on the other hand, it is a well-known idea. Many of you probably know how Soviet government used the so-called thieves-in-law culture to control prisons in a more easy and a more easy way. And you can see that they might have imagined Birja as a sense of schooling for that. So in that case, it was a supplementary institution. So if we continue toward when the Soviet Union collapsed, that's really easy. It's really easy to imagine the idea of how Birjas flourished, and I would imagine that for a lot of Georgians, Georgians my age, I'm 34, and my age, and maybe older Georgians, maybe younger Georgians, for them, imagination of Birja, when you tell them Birja, they would imagine that time of let's say, early 90s and late 90s. So that was a time of paradise for Birja. And the reason for that is that it was like not only was it popular in the sense that there was no important, but also it was a substitutive place. So because of poverty, there were no resources that the state could offer to the population. So on Birjas, you could get something that you could not get otherwise. So it was somehow a substitutive. So it was somehow Birjas substituted also like a law. In a sense, and substituted also like social assistance. Again, if we make one more step toward the Rose Revolution and legacy of Saakashvili's government, again, it's completely evident how we could intuitively understand Birjas at that time. So, and the fight against Birja. So, and a lot of that is described also in articles by Constanza. Once again, I would like to thank her for informing us on it, and also Zhenya Zakharova, who also talked about it. And then here, we have to understand, and we have to repeat one more time, that the idea of Birjas were alien to the law and order and this harsh top-down modernization rhetoric that was a large part of the legacy of Saakashvili and his government, his party. So therefore, he fought this practice one way or another. That could be like crackdowns, longer sentences for petty crime, which was somehow connected to practices of Birja, like one way or the other, or like cultural change. And the Saakashvili's government has somehow planned to substitute the idea of Birja, so idle pastime somehow, and the Zakharova mentions that patriot camps that the Saakashvili's government has proposed and developed. So these were gatherings of young people's banks, young people's camps somehow. They were somehow quite similar to Soviet, something called Artek in Soviet Union. Anyway, what he was planning to instill in that sense is somehow a new type of ideology or different kind of life and opportunities to young people. And that was somehow, and in that sense, you could imagine that BIRZHA was somehow a resistant form of practice at that time. So somehow it was alien for that time, like ideologically, it was an alien institution. So, and since 2012, and if we move to the next ideological step, and that is my question to a lot of you here. We live in a political world which is which has less profound and less sharp political contours. And that is because the ruling party and the ruling ideology is not coherent at all. And it does not have a coherent practice in the sense of economic policy. It doesn't have a coherent practice in the sense of law and order, because sometimes it is repressive, sometimes it is very, let's say, the opposite. And it's an amalgam and some people have said, and I think it's an amalgam of nothing. So somehow the idea of BIRZHA, and that is my question to you guys, how do we situate the idea and practice of BIRZHA in this political amalgam of nothing? So how does the idea and the practice of BIRZHA, let's say, situate logical reality in this, let's say, few words, and then we can continue with the group together. Thank you. So now I will offer Keti Chukhrovi to say a few words, and later after Keti Chukhrovi, Keti Sartani I will say a few words. Thank you. Thank you. Keti, please. Keti Chukhrovi, please.
გამარჯობათ ყველას მოგესალმებით. დიდი მადლობა დაპატიჟებისთვის და თქვენის ნებით გადავალ ქართულ ინგლისურზე, იმიტომ რომ ყველამ რო გაიგოს. So I'm really glad to join this research group, and just to say that I'm not a researcher of urban sociality, nor am I a sociologist, but my studies mainly dwell on socialist political economy. And also I come from Georgia, and I spent my Soviet years in Tbilisi, so I quite well remember the BIRZHA context and the urban context, full of this kind of grouping around the center of the city. Well, for me, this emancipatory context of BIRZHA is not so evident, and I will try to explain why. Because as I guess, as from what Misha has just said, it is really interesting to explore this practice as a public space and as some kind of resisting potentiality. But at the same time, we have to be a little more cautious in terms of just placing it in historical context and understanding the differences within the emancipation. Well, I would like to start from the similarities that the BIRZHA has with the Middle East cultures. For instance, you can come across this open public space, male presences, collective presences elsewhere in Istanbul, in Beirut, in Alexandria, in Cairo. And this is mainly male sociality, and Misha has already mentioned it. It definitely bears in itself this patriarchal element when male are freely and liberally communicating and exchanging their ideas. Someone is working and taking care of their households and taking care of children. So this element of dissection between male and female is already part and parcel of this sociality. And already this cannot tell us that it is just fully emancipatory. Another thing is that, well, Georgian birjas, as they were conspicuous and as they developed in Soviet Tbilisi or Soviet Batumi, for instance, but mainly, of course, in Tbilisi, were, of course, not simply public presences, much more, as you already mentioned, they were the parallel sociality. The parallel sociality that was somehow countercultural and against the labor policies of the Soviet Union. So it was not simply some leisure time as against the working hours as we have it in the Middle East, because here you see the male crowds in their leisure time, whereas in Soviet Georgia, you have the completely and totally free time as some kind of resisting temporality or the parallel non-labor grouping and non-labor, non-working collectivities as against the radically laboring socialist Soviet collectives. And as you know, in the Soviet Union, being unemployed and having no job would be even criminalized. To be employed was an obligation, and the only social groups that were somehow by definition allowed to be unemployed were the so-called formerly imprisoned people, former prisoners, so to say. And I would like to connect this culture of public presence very much with this semi-criminal or semi-mafia stylistics, which was very important and which was part and parcel of Birsha. You probably all, being Georgians, remember this notion of Zveli Bici, which translates into English as the old boy. Old boy meaning well, some representative of certain kind of underground economy, underground shadow sociality, shadow communication. So this shadow element of semi-criminally not being employed, semi-criminally inscribed in shadow economy was really very important in Birsha. I would emphasize another dimension, that this semi-criminal component was very much poeticized in Soviet Union. Why? Because former prisoners were somehow tied with political imprisonment, and political imprisonment in Stalinist and post-Stalinist times was regarded as some kind of heroic background, as some kind of counter-bureaucratic, counter-party, counter-Soviet dissidentship. So this prison or criminal context was immediately endowed with some kind of heroic, poetic, chivalric element, and it was by definition already regarded as dissident. And the other way around, quite like the former criminal elements were endowed with this cultural, poetic aspects, the cultural agents, the representatives of Georgian socialist culture were often mimicking the Zveli Bici, the old boys, some sort of prisoning, semi-criminal jargons, body language, choreography, which was non-official, non-Soviet, non-party choreography. So they were mimicking it, and somehow we have these aberrations and mutations between the semi-criminal and dissident cultural spheres. So we have this superimposition of the semi-criminal and the cultural dissidentships. For me, this aspect was probably much more important than the presence in the public space. And I would mention that it is very symptomatic that, for instance, those figures who were the main representatives of Georgian government during the transfer of Soviet power into the post-Soviet power, the two figures in charge of the Soviet Georgian, post-Soviet Georgian governmentality, such as Jaba Ioseliani and Tengiz Kitovani, they were also the representatives of cultural elite, because one was the painter and another was the playwright and writer, and they were very talented and conspicuous in their artistic fields. But at the same time, they were in charge of the most important military squadrons, which were leading the war and launching the war in Abkhazia. But at the same time, they were the main military force that Shevardnadze used to organize the coup d'etat against Zviad Gamsahurdia. So, of course, they were not the classical representatives of Birzha as such, but this Birzha choreography, Birzha body language, and the component of dissidentship within Birzha was intersecting with this discourse of counter-socialist and counter-Soviet dissidentship, which was generating not only the jargons, but special types of cultural detours, social detours. And what is very important here is also special types of courting between male and females. In socialist sexuality and socialist erotics, we had these prescribed types of male-female marriage and male-female de-eroticized relationship. The Birzha and this semi-official, informal, as Misha mentioned, socialities enabled chivalry. And this chivalry was, of course, some kind of inheritance and heritage of Georgian medieval traditions, which had the chance to also be resistant against this socialist familial reproduction. And you remember very well, those who are Georgians, how important it was this type of erotic chivalry organized within Birzha, and some types of special attractivity of maleness, of male behavior in reference to these chivalric female images that were very important within this tradition, and all these kidnappings and fights for the girls, etc. So this probably requires a special research, but I would mention what is really a paradox for me, and I will end with this. So the most paradoxic aspect that I would like to emphasize is the temporality of Birzha. So the temporality of Birzha was not simply, again, as I mentioned, some kind of dissected time when you take away time from the labor working hours, but it was completely free time. It was a complete exodus from the official space of state labor, state production, and state ideology, producing some sort of timelessness. I would say in Russian, безвременье. And of course, I would connect this timelessness, paradoxic as it seems, as the generation, and I see it as a product, this possibility of timelessness, this possibility of completely free time, the production of non-capitalist, that is Soviet socialist forms of political economy, where capitalist production, relying on surplus value and relying on incessant income, was suspended. So exactly due to the fact that the Soviet socialism was banning the private property and surplus economy, it was possible to create these counter-socialist and counter-Soviet completely free time socialities. And this is a very important paradox. In other words, only socialist production without private property and without hegemony of profit could have provided such a frozen, liberated temporality, which historically was labeled, as we remember, stagnation, zastoy, but which paradoxically, being part and parcel of the Soviet ideology, generated the so-called anti-Soviet realms of counter-cultures due to precisely Soviet political economy. So I would end here, and then we could go into debate. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Can anyone hear me now? Thank you. So I don't know which microphone is you hear me from, but I would like to thank Katie for this thick description of the practice of Birzha and the like let's say sociality around it and how that connected to politics and economics. I would say economy. Now I would like to ask Katie for her input, and then we can have a talk together. Thank you. And please, Katie Sartania.
Both of them, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I need mine if you hear. Okay. They're back. Can you hear me? Please give me a sign if you hear me. Yes. Okay, thank you. My name is Katie, and thank you for having me here, Misha and others who were organizers of this meeting. gathering. I have not prepared anything formal speech or talk, but I would like to comment on what the previous I wanted to talk about culture of streets based on my observations in Tbilisi, because I'm not working on academic or formal research right now on urban things or the culture of a street. But I wonder why you, Misha, or other people use culture of street when it's more about politics and economics, because if you look close to the streets, even in Tbilisi or especially outside of Tbilisi, we see that you can just read the streets as a history of our of this country in terms of politics and economics. Because when I was a child, I remember that we had much space in our yards, like close to our buildings. I could play as a child, but today I see that they are covered with cars, or they are used for more commercial reasons. And I would say that when I read streets today, during my formal observations, I see politics and economics. And I would stop here because I want to pay your attention one more important dimension, more important, of course, to me, of BIRZHA, which is visible from my window, and I observe this space on a daily basis. And this is rubber BIRZHA, but I'm not sure if I translate this correctly in English. From BIRZHA, which is near to Bakushti Street, and another one that I've seen and I've visited is in Varkatili, in suburbs of Tbilisi, and the first one that I mentioned is near to Eliava. And I visit these places very often because one is close to my place, and I see how people work there. And I had some interviews there, and people are telling me that so it's a place, open space under the bridge, and people gather there, mostly men, like 40 up to 60 or even 70 years old, and they are coming from villages and rural areas of Georgia, and they rent one building, one flat in Tbilisi. So they live together from 5 to 8 people, 8 men, and they work here as workers. So they do everything that is connected to renovation of buildings or physical working and things like this, and then they send money to their families, to their families. And as the previous that she was mentioning that BIRZHA is more connected to unemployment of in Georgian case, but today I see that it is also connected to unemployment, but also the will or the wish that people want to have jobs. And during this pandemic, when I spoke with these people who are gathering around this labor BIRZHA, I would say, I'm not sure if I use this word correctly, but labor BIRZHA, and these people are telling me that before pandemic they were visiting Turkey or even Russia to work there as I don't know, as a daily workers. So what I see today is that when we talk about this kind of things called streets and BIRZHAs, for me they have more economic and political meanings, and I just wanted to add this. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for adding this topic that we didn't quite cover right now. I would just like to add that according to some authors, the term Birja, like the Georgian, why we call this place Birja, is because it was initially called Targovaya Birja or something similar. So a place where people would gather in search of work. And exactly like people right now, the people you have described in people who are around Eliava market or other areas, who are just there waiting for people to employ them. And it's quite interesting that when we talk, like when we, meaning we, I mean people who are, let's say, not manual workers. Yeah, nobody is here manual worker. People around here, we are cultural workers, so-called cultural workers, academic workers, or academic non-employed people, some sort of people like that. And we imagine Birja as we don't think, we think less when we think of Birja, when we think less of places like Katie has described, more about places like that are in many of the urban areas in Tbilisi. So I would just like to ask, so first I would like to ask many of you about the, we talked a lot about the politics, the connection of politics and Birja, and in a more simpler ideological sense, but also like a more recent, not from let's say 90s, but we may think of it as a more. Sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Thank you. So we talked a lot about politics as it's connected to ideology. But we may think of politics in a more structural sense, in a more economic sense. So when I was coming here, I was just thinking to myself, so how does Birja, the practice of Birja, change in the current economy that we have now? So a lot of younger people have completely different practices of life than they had 20 years ago. But still, it is not evident for me, like many have written, that the practice of Birja or Birjaoba is disappearing or is evolving. I don't think it is disappearing, at least. So my question to you is, how do you think the practice of Birja or Birja, the culture, I mean, still culture of Birja is changing with the changes in the economic structure of our cities? And this is my question to you. And we have one. We have two people who want to say something. So Constanza and then Misha, please.
Hello.
Hello. My profession is most academic, political scientist, and I think that Birja transport from purely like street activities into more marketable place. Like now Birjas are bars, pubs, maybe clubs, and also technical tools like social networks, like Facebook, and so it's all supplanted this more older version of Birja into new technological, especially for millennials. Now Birja is more like connected to social networks and all this Facebook activities or some. So and going to clubs or pubs or bars. That's my opinion. Okay.
Does anyone else from the online have a
Can I also comment?
Asaba Shuri Levan.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. How are you? What? Uh, yeah, thank you, Misha, for the question. It's very important, like how Birja is presented in the current in the contemporary city in Tbilisi, and what it is its role, political and social role, and yeah, we all know that every election is. For every election, it is very important to find support on the like local support stems out of Birjas often, and it's very important kind of like a circle from where the like a local support can be found, and I think when we think about the transformation of Birja, we also have to think about the transformation of society, of our society, in a way of the inequalities, because as we know, like the level of inequality has is rising dramatically from the 90s, and this kind of different groups, different social groups or classes, they find their own kind of like socializing spaces. So if for example in the 90s people from different social classes would kind of gather together on Birja, now I think it's more rare to see this. It also depends, through this inequality approach, it also depends about which neighborhood we are talking about. In central neighborhoods, it would be different. In the peripheries, it would be also it could be also different. For example, in the center, where the touristification has taken place, Birjas are completely transformed and also dispersed because of this kind of tourist presence, and also more control, and yeah, what is coming with this kind of tourist economy, and in the peripheries. I think Birjas still have a very important role, and as far as we have a very high unemployment, Birjas and also with the low incomes of the people who are like potentially the Birjaviks, they find the street and the street gathering more kind of like a to meet people who are in the same situation as themselves, and yes, I think it's still important today. And one more thing is that I would suggest you to see Birja. Of course, it has a negative kind of like consequences and negative connotations, but I think we should think about it about its positive aspects also, as well as negatives. Thank you.
Constanza now, she is here. Please to comment.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry, I don't know what happened with my internet. It collapsed completely, but now it's okay. I think actually Levan said much of what I actually wanted to say. I missed a bit of his of what he was saying, but what I wanted to say I think if we look at the politics on the public space that the previous government, Saakashvili's government had, and the current government had, for the not much I know, because unfortunately I haven't been too often in Tbilisi in the last few years, but it seems to me that the approach that the Saakashvili's government had, which is the period that I focused most of my research on Birja, it was this very strong state type approach, a very zero tolerance approach to the space, the urban space, and all the kind of social manifestation that happened in that space. And Birja was one of them, but as we know from many other type of research that have been done during on those years, other kind of informal phenomena such as the street vendors or whatever was an expression of these sort of like underground economy and informal kind of attitudes towards like public life was very severely repressed. The Birja I think it was very much targeted because it spoiled this idea of like a nice public space that the government wanted to promote, but also because it was, as we have been talking about, an expression of these very strong power of these set of like informal understanding, informal rules, which had a very strong grip, especially on the young people, because that was Birja is, I mean, even though of course there are people that are in their 60s or something that like hang out still in Birja, but I think especially from what we gather from also what cool of the street, so it's something that is involves like first and foremost very young and younger people. And if we look at the politics on the public space of the current government, is more type of like I think is less repression, at least on the surface, and is more this type of like blatant privatization and the commodification and gentrification of the space, as Levani said, like especially when it comes to the city center. So I think it's quite interesting to see what Birja has become following that type of politics and the type of space that has been left for Birja to inhabit. And of course, I think it's really important what Levani was saying, that there is a growing gap between the city center and the old town, which used to be very sort of like a fertile terrain for Birja back in the days, and the periphery. I think now it's much more likely to see Birja in the suburbs than in the city center, but also in terms of like what people like do, like I don't know if people who have some kind of like more diversified life trajectory in terms of like more opportunity today, whether they will like be part of Birja nonetheless, or whether they would, I don't know, because they have the money for doing that, they will just go to study in Europe, or they will just go and get a job. So if there is like this more kind of like a class differentiation today, that goes hand in hand within this type of approach that the current administration has had on the public space of Tbilisi and other cities. So it's not really an answer; it's more questions. But I hope I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Constanta, for your. I would like to. Oh, Katie, you want to say something? Please, Katie.
I went between different periods of the sociality which we have, Soviet sociality, and what Levan was mentioning about the contemporary situation, and what Katie Sartania was mentioning about the self-employment. And well, it is very interesting that if in Soviet context, birja is a metaphor. It is some kind of symbolic umbrella to dissect this sociality from the state and to somehow persevere in non-working. So it's some kind of société des ouvriers, if you remember the term of Blanchot. So it is deliberately non-working community. In contemporary situation, it's these are the groups that are abandoned by the state, which find their own means of employment and finding the job. And you can find such birjas, for instance, for the Central Asian workers in Moscow, where the Tajik, Uzbek, and other people are gathering also in certain kind of, well, quasi-birjas. But what was most important, what I wanted to mention, my travel to Abkhazia. You know that this state of Abkhazia doesn't have any official status, and actually its government is also semi-legal. But what was fantastic for me to observe there, that the whole sociality, male sociality, and the types of employment is organized by means of kinship. So not social infrastructure, but kinship. Რასაც ჩვენ ქართველები ვეძახით ნაცნობობით, ბლატით. So the whole sociality is superseded by kinship, and then the question is it good when the infrastructure, employment, social organization becomes kinship? And the Abkhazian people were even boasting that, look, we have no state at all. We only have this kinship, only have this horizontal mutual organization, which is semi-criminal, but at the same time, it's some kind of brotherhood. So it's not a sociality, it's not a Gesellschaft, but it's a Gemeinschaft, some kind of brotherhood sociality. And of course, in this counter state situation, this is the only possibility of social reproduction, but nevertheless, it has these negative connotations of kinship.
Thank you, Katie. Are there more comments on this? No? Okay, if there are not...
Can you hear me? Sorry, can you hear me? There is my joke, sorry. You know, we are speaking... Sorry. We are speaking about how birja is changing in the context of today's economy. But birja, until recently, birja was about thieves in law in a large extent. So maybe somebody could comment on what are the connections of today's birja with this part of economy, which was represented by the society of citizen, because I know that these people are mostly have mostly immigrated to Europe, where they try sometimes successfully, sometimes less successfully to operate somehow their businesses. Are there any connections between any connection? I think that there are connections, but are there any valid and important connections, and which are important to mention about birjas and thieves in law abroad today? Because it was until recently, birja was about shadow economy, which was governed by thieves and thieves in law. So what is about to, what the situation is today? Maybe some, because it's already till 2012, since 2012 that I am not working in the field. I'm not doing field work on this topic, but I'm just observing the situation. Maybe somebody have some information or observation on this topic. And as for maybe some external observation, it's interesting. I would like it to say already a separate comment. I would like to mention that when I was researching Birja during Saakashvili time, it was very difficult to find anything present on in the public sphere, in the public space. I mean, on TV or in newspapers, anything about Birjas in a positive context or in some neutral context. There was a lot of information about fighting with the street, with artisan law, but no information about Birja. I think that one TV series which is very well known to anybody who speaks Georgian is Chemitsoli's Nakalevi, which I think is very successful in mirroring the everyday life. And this TV series was already on show during Saakashvili time, and you couldn't hear almost anything about Birja there before. And when Georgian Dream or Kartveli Otsnava came to power, we can observe a lot of stories which are connected to Birja and to the street on TV. So this the situation has been liberated, and we can freely speak of Birja today, which is quite interesting. So the dispositions, the official dispositions are changing, and it's also symptomatic. Thank you. And my question about your observation on the connections between the cities in law world and Birjas is still valid. Please, maybe somebody will comment on this. Thank you. Oh, have you? Could you hear me at all? Because I can't. Okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Constanza, we have. I mean, we should let maybe others also speak. So
Of course, if somebody wants to say something, otherwise I have a short reply to Zhenya, but of course that can be done later if there are other people. I cannot see if there are other people that want to talk, but I'm very happy to leave my turn.
So I would just like to. So I would just like to move on to. I think that I would like to ask all of you guys. So we are at an architectural biennial right now, and I was noticing, I was paying a lot of attention to what the renovation of the current courtyards that the new municipal government, not new, but the Kaladze's government, municipal government is doing, and I noticed that beyond renovating also these places of Birja. You may call them in Russian besetkas, you may call them like a gaming areas for older people, but at least in every courtyard that I go to, there is a place there either not renovated or renovated for like some sort of sitting down area for that is like technically we may call it like a local Birja, yeah. So my question to you guys is this. So we may understand Birja as this kind of minimal public space. So you are a person, you want to go to your to meet your commoners, neighbors, somebody to talk about something, and this is a free space to talk about it. And the government is helping us.
But also maybe with cameras.
Yeah, so we want to gather and talk about stuff. It can be politics, it can be daily life, it can be how to improve the area, it can be how to destroy the government, it can be anything. So I just want to ask you guys, how can we compare this kind of minimal public space to this larger public space that we understand, like in front of the Rustaveli, in front of the parliament, or in front of this cancellery. So this kind of public space that is known to us, where we make political demands? How can we? What is the same and what is different from this between this minimal public space and this let's say public space, larger public space? So how is communication the same and how is it different? What do you think? So Zhenya has one comment, but she has already commented once. So therefore, I will let maybe others comment first. Here, maybe locally, offline, buddy. So I will just let Zhenya and Katie one after another. Thank you. Zhenya number one, and then Katie, and then Levan, and then yeah, okay.
Okay.
Then,
I just wanted to say that first of all, Birja is different in terms of locality, because these communities are local, they are linked to locality. While what we can observe near along Rusta Valley or this political manifestation, they have no local basis, and in this way, this is a principal difference. And as for the fate of Birja, I think that it always will be valid, since it is at least in Georgia, because it is south, it is warm, and people always will tend to socialize in this way. That's all for now.
let Katie, please. Katie Chukrov. Chukrov. Katie. Katie Chukrov.
I would make my comment by asking you the question back. Do you hear me? Asking you guys, for instance, you are now in certain sort of space which is labeling itself as Birja. Do you treat yourself as Birja or as an institution? Because I would like to question what is the difference between instituent practice, of which, for instance, Antonio Negri is talking when we need an instituent practice for resisting organization and resisting self-organization, and what is Birja? To what extent Birja sociality and Birja commonality is different from this instituent practice that wants to spread into sociality in universal terms? And I think what is lacking in Birja is exactly what Zhenya Zakharova mentioned, this a little bit self-sufficiency, this hermetic localized context and kinship, which cannot open up as instituent practice. And I think for Georgia, it is very important, this institutional openness and development of institutional discourses, and not simply the community discourses, which are producing more and more these hermetic communities, which was always the problem of Georgia. Thank you.
And after that, Constanza Curro.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that yeah, it's very important like how the local this kind of local circles, birjas, small birjas in the neighborhoods or in the courtyards relate to the bigger public space. But also, I think in between there is hierarchy of birjas. For example, like there are.
You can hear me, but we cannot hear you. So can you repeat from the very beginning?
Okay, now you hear me? Now you hear me?
Okay, so yes.
Okay. So it's very important how the small birjas, like in the neighborhood courtyards, relate to the public, like a bigger public space, which are with scale and locality different. But also within the birjas, there are hierarchies. Do you hear me? So when you have a birja in the courtyard, there is also always some place in the neighborhood, in the ubani, where is the main birja, like main gathering of the probably some representatives who are more like on local level, more kind of like established birjaviks go on the central birja, like in the neighborhood. So yeah, this kind of together with the relationship of smaller, like smallest nucleus to the bigger, like I don't know, like in front of the somewhere like government house, this kind of public space. It is also interesting to see how these birjas, these localities relate to each other, and if there is some hierarchy. And from my kind of like observation, yeah, there happen to be this kind of hierarchies where of course this is important because the information is spread through these kind of channels, and attitudes and this kind of political subjectivities are built through the through these channels. So that's why I think it's important.
Do you have a comment? If you do, please say it.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Me? Hi.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, just a couple of things about the relationship with Birja and the thieves-in-law. It's interesting that this big sort of criminal aspect of the Birja is probably somehow decreasing in recent years, and it's true that there is like if we talk about the actual presence of thieves-in-law in Georgia, there are not many left because, as Zhenya mentioned, most of them are sort of successful mafia-style businessmen, or maybe not that successful in Western Europe, or they are in prison, but not in Georgia. I think there are maybe one or two. This maybe I will talk about that on Thursday in my talk about prison and street. So if you are interested, you can listen to that. And the second is, I think it's very interesting what both Zhenya and you, Misha, you were saying about this. On the one hand, there is some, if I understood properly, almost institutionalization of Birja and the government, the local government refurbishing sort of these spaces where people usually gather. So I don't know. I haven't seen that, but for me, like the visual kind of places of Birja was mainly very liminal and very kind of people creating any sort of seats from I don't know, whatever was at hand, and it was not even necessarily always the same place, but it was quite fixed, but very not the kind of central Birja that Levani was mentioning, but more like very small and very liminal kind of spaces just outside maybe the apartment blocks or in places like that. So on the one hand, maybe the institutionalization, and on the other hand is this maybe ridiculization, like what Eugenia was saying about in Saakashvili's time, you couldn't find anything about Birja in the media or whatever, and now there is a lot of making fun, actually, of Birja. There are several TV series. There is this Kai Bici Shkola is one. The other one is about prison. I don't remember, but it's made by the same people, and it's basically sort of like making fun of Bici, of Tbilisi, of Kurdi, and then you have like like a very kind of all these vignettes that you can find online about like Tbilisi Choba and all these sort of things. So is it like a sign that Birja as a sort of like as a way of socialization and also as a type of like culture and counterculture has been losing grip on people and has been institutionalized on the one hand, and on the other hand has been commodified, but also sort of like taking, you know, like making jokes about. I think it's very interesting to explore, especially this sort of popular culture side that Birja has become an object of. And see, you know, why is that the case? Thank you.
Misha, the other Misha, Michał, has a comment, please.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I just wanted to, this discussion is getting really interesting and multifaceted, so I just wanted to add to it, and I think maybe add to particularly to what Ketty and Constanza and Zhenya were saying, that, I mean, if we are building, as Birja Station is doing, if we are turning the Birja into an architecture, which is perhaps equivalent to an institution of some kind. So if we formalize Birja in the context of an architecture biennial, and also if we put it forward as a model for public space, then we are turning it into an institution, but we're also turning it into a formalized physical form. So if we want to turn Birja into an architecture, how do we avoid building into the architecturalized Birja those dark sides of Birja, to put it bluntly, that Ketty in particular identified? So how do we not build the patriarchy and the violence and the kind of connection to criminality into the architecture of Birja? Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously it's more complex than that, but I think I'll leave it there. Does Birja as an architecture have to be somehow cleansed or reformed in order to be able to function as a kind of equitable model for public space?
I think we can leave this as an open question until the very end, and indeed, maybe I don't know exactly what were the actual thoughts of the municipal government, but maybe that's what they tried to do when they built this new besetkas for the local for people who live in the neighborhood. You can also, when you come to Georgia after the pandemic, you can check them out, how they are used, who uses them, how they are maybe reconceptualized again. Yeah, and yeah. So I had a question to people who are around here. Maybe I would like to ask this question more to offline people around here. So, I mean, maybe you go to Birja yourself, like some of you, and how was the feeling for you? Like, what did you feel when you went there? What did you talk about? And who talked to you? And what was the feeling of that communication? So, I would like to ask that question to people who go to Birja goers. And how did that feel? How did that feel? Like, what did you talk about, and how did you talk about it? Okay. So Misha, this Misha, the other third Misha, or second, and then.
Thank you for question. So I said Birja Choir in 90s. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it was like a place for socialization building networks and be in a community, to belong to community in certain district where you lived. Basically, and if you succeeded in Birja, you can succeed it in life. Like you can get grow, you can get network, you are protected, you can get job, but in criminal world, basically. Yeah. And yeah, it was like the street was providing your security. It was like when you went to outside, it was already Birja, so it was like your even like supplanting your parents. Yeah, it provided everything. Like you basically lived on street, and street was your provider of security, food, friends, and everything. So it was just like this at that time. Yeah, as I noticed. Yeah. So thank you.
The one thing, and it's been nostalgic and very romantic part of Birja's thing is that it's somehow the way of communication and traditions of our cultural ties, typology connections or something like that. This is some kind of module which connects community into one place, and it's improved or something like that. It's Georgia, you can eat Italian and so on. But let's say so, Birja is the place where you are free, so from other influences, right? Where you, with your courtyard guys, with your community, are somehow detached from other communities. Let's say, for example, we are sitting in academic quarter, and we are somehow our orientation is very different from BBB or Vake or Nahaloka orientations, right? So it somehow symbolizes the orientation and visionary aspects of communities, right? So it can be discussed in other ways that if government somehow promotes such kind of structures in the communities, they have the ideology that with kind of promotions, with this kind of promotion, they say that let's detach these ideas, not to be somehow completed and somehow connected together in front of parliament being because somehow after the Soviet Union's collapse, after 90s, after this war, this civil war or something like that, that it was somehow inspiration of detached communities to detach the so-called Satsmo and something like that. I think Evgenia knows it much more better than me because her research was related to this thing. Such kind of influence in the city, it somehow detached these communities from each other. We have the same language in Sabukalo, but Sabukalo has also sub-languages, many sub-languages. So government helps us to make like happy structure, which has in blue period, in Georgian Dream period has blue shadow, and it had in Saakashvili's period red shadow around, you know what I mean? They somehow promote and somehow provoke the different types of ideologies to be detached from each other and to somehow back up this about one idea, how to change something, you know what I mean?
It became artificial.
It's kind of a tool how to rule people, and Birja is some kind of typology. Like you have a playground, you can make Birja, you can do a stream. You had very good research about streams on last biennial. You can do anything somehow to provoke people how to get into you. You know what I mean?
Making some camps of maybe for voting, maybe. Or you tend to Birjas will be like mostly voters of Otsneba, like Reds for. So it's like.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you, Misha. Please, you have a comment and somebody else? Okay, you.
I just want to continue what Gigi. I've been observing just one neighbor on Sabu Tower, and during the last elections, I have mentioned that these guys, like normal Birja guys, were kind of pushing you to vote for Georgian Dream. So, and as I saw it, they were like connected City Hall, or I don't know which institution exactly. Yeah, so this, like we see it. Guys, even my neighbor was telling me, go and sign this number. This, I don't remember what number was that. It was like pointing me to mention mark this number. So it was like very surprising. It surprised me because before the Birjas, government, Birjas were very during the government, they came back, and they somehow became a political instrument to tell everybody what to do. And now it's like mainstream. Others are just going to be and that.
Thank you, Ev. Thank you. So this is our celebration today. Thank you. We will wait until this ends, and then we will continue. Okay, we will wait until this ends. Okay, just to say, there is one thing that one topic that there's no way of not touching. This is really important, I think, and I don't know, like why we don't. I think this was in Constanta's paper, and she was interviewing somebody, and somebody said that. What is? I think the question was that how do women connect to Birja? And this somebody said, yes, of course, women are in Birja. They take their drunk husbands home. Was the answer. So, and my question to you is that yeah, we talk a lot, we pontificated a lot about this, how communication in Birja happens, how politics is constructed, how daily life is constructed, how maybe like subversion is constructed, and how the opposite. But how does that happen when you have this kind of secluded actually area? I mean, how can we even dare to say this thing in this context? And Katarina has a comment, and after that, please raise your hand if somebody else has a comment.
Well, I cannot say how it happens in Birja, but
watch that. Cameron?
Oops. Come on. I just want to point out that there are other spaces actually also for women, because as some of you know, I did research in the public baths, the Kiev public baths, It's also a very specific age group. It's women 75 years and older who meet there on a regular basis, and actually everything, I mean, apart from what you have been telling, the former or maybe present part of crime, criminality, everything else is the same. Well, women are naked there, and there's no alcohol, but apart from that, the conversations, the topics, discussing politics, daily life, husbands, children, like society structures, it seems to me to some extent at the present level, let's say like that, that we have a lot of parallel worlds. So coming back to many comments earlier, we have a very fragmented society. So you earlier said that young people nowadays go to the clubs and bars, as discussed before, only people who have the money. On my street, there is a, well, to be honest, until recently I didn't know the word birja. There is a birja on my street, but the guys are between 20 and maximum 30 years old. I have no idea what it is because I do not interact. But we have all those different meeting grounds, and I think the most important thing that we should actually do, I mean, this discussion is probably a good start for that, but to not only identify, but figure out those different meeting grounds, who meets where, and see the overlapping parts, because the way society all over the world, but also here, is going, we are pushed into more fragmentation. So I agree also on the comment that all those state provided, oh, you can meet there. That's not public space. That's a state space that is given to you. But the public spaces that we create are different ones. And we, I mean, like all different kinds of groups. And to find the overlapping parts, then we can maybe think about, you know, you were asking earlier, this place here, is it a birja or not? Is it a kind of art or architecture birja, or is it a real one? We might be able to find more ways to connect again instead of having the different stereotypes, and also allowing this.
Because they can.
I'm sorry, but allowing the economic system we live in to, yeah, I don't know the right word for that, but to push us even more far than we already are.
Thank you. More comments? Online comments? Somebody from online? There is somebody online. Raising hand. It's far away. I cannot see who is that. Constanza is. Please.
Okay, thank you. No, well, of course, the so-called gender issue at Birja is very essential, and what Michal was asking, like, how do we sort of avoid building in this so-called dark side? I mean, of course, in a way, it's a dark side. On the other hand, when we talk about Birja, in the maybe like general understanding, it is a lot about masculinity and masculine performances. So that doesn't mean, I think, for what I was told at least, that a woman in theory cannot be, you know, a part of that, because all the issues Zhenya was talking about in her talk the other day of Zmakatsoba and Katsoba and so on, are in theory kind of qualities that a woman can also have, so-called, I think it was called Vashkatsi Kali. So it's something that a woman also can embody this of qualities and do this kind of performances. Then, if in fact it's easy to see women that are part of the kind of birja that we have in mind, so more kind of like related to this sort of like semi-criminal underground and whatever, it's another issue. Is also an issue of that for the demographic, probably at least up to some years ago. By the age that men were going and guys were going to birja, women had maybe already children in most cases, and it was also an issue that you know, they would not have the possibility of attending birja also because of that. On the other hand, I think what Katarina, was saying, it's about like widening also a bit this understanding of BIRZHA and what is BIRZHA and what is not, because something I found quite interesting when I was doing my research at the beginning, it was really like asking, what do you think when I mentioned BIRZHA? And of course, maybe the overall understanding is more the kind of BIRZHA and Dveli and the like. But in many cases, people were saying, oh, we just call BIRZHA like any kind of gathering in some open or public space. I remember some woman at university was saying, oh, we just, when we go with my colleagues to get a coffee, we just say we just have some BIRZHA with my colleagues. And the same happens when, for example, very small children actually also gather. So maybe also a way of not building in this dark side might be also to widening this understanding of BIRZHA more on the sociability side and see what other understanding are there. But of course, there is the issue of masculinity, which is very, very prominent, I think.
Tisha. Okay, more comments on this? If not, I will just continue or go back to where I started. So, and this would be probably like a final, I don't know how much time we have, or if you, okay. So I just go back to where we started and where I started. So we have a bit of a political context where, in my understanding, the BIRZHAs, the political context of BIRZHAs, is a bit lost. And my question to you is this: what kind of political footing can BIRZHAs find in the political context that we are living at now? And or to just add to that, what kind of emancipatory political context can BIRZHAs currently, in the political context that we are around in Georgia or in Tbilisi, Batumi, Kutaisi, around these areas are? So what is a emancipatory political context of BIRZHAs that we may imagine? Or maybe they exist. What do you think? Thank you. Okay. 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 So symbolic that nobody answered this question.
Okay. Can I answer? Can I answer? Try to answer. Just I had a problem with my sound. Misha, do you hear? Do you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So my comment was in what that my association. It's easier for me to associate BIRZHA with more conservative and maybe patriarchal political discourse, because as far as we can remember all the time when we had protests, during Saakashvili's time, BIRZHA and the discourse of BIRZHA, like a language of BIRZHA and language of Academy of the Street, was associated with conservative, traditionalist ideas of some traditional image of Georgian society. It's difficult for me to imagine any manifestations of this of the discourse of Birzha in any how to say progressive context. Maybe you have different ideas, but for me, Birzha is still associated mostly with these conservative ideas, political and conservative political context. Thank you.
Chukhrov has now. Katie Chukhrov has a comment. Yes.
Well, I would say that on the one hand, my attitude to Birzha is that it is so attractive in terms of observing it culturally. It would be really terrible if Birzha disappeared. And if you look at it as some kind of the free underground society, which is not governmentalized, it is really important to have this sociality. On the other hand, the problem is that Birzha can only politicize itself if it really becomes some sort of civic policy or civil society agency. And the problem is that why Zhenya is quite right, and I would agree with her that it is much more conservative and based on these patriarchal values, is because it cannot socialize itself into the languages of open social instituency. So the care of Birzha is about its own members of its closed community. Maybe as a familial structure, it is really very comfortable space to inhabit it, but much more progressive, I think, for such communities, such patriarchal communities as Georgia, would be to appropriate institutional agencies from the government, then to expand Birzha. But this is my opinion. Just to repeat, so it would be more politically productive to appropriate institutional potentialities from state institutes and develop them than to insist on this counter-governmentability of these older mythologized poetic constructions.
Okay, there is one more comment on the online. Is there a comment on the online? Can you please tell me if there is?
Yes, yes.
Okay, please do it now.
So do you hear me? Yeah, good. So first of all, Misha, I cannot agree with you that it completely like lost its meaning, because while we are discussing here, I think different parties are now working on the platforms or Birzhas to find their supporters and kind of spread their kind of truth there. So I think it's more transformed than just like then lost the meaning, and I think Birzhas are still very important today, and I think they will remain so quite for a time, at least until the economy is kind of like not put on this kind of developmental kind of trade. And about the emancipation thing, I think it has different kind of levels of potential of emancipation. And yeah, to start from the local level, I think the notion of kind of claiming the space is very important, because when I see the Birzha as a kind of like a claiming of space. And as I said today, atomized, and mostly on the Birja you will find yeah, people, unemployed people, or people from working class, or kind of low social status people, and their presence in the space, in public space, is one of the ways of claiming it, because they control the space. They talk to the government, like city government, like how to arrange a space, so on and so on. So it's kind of this kind of local level, and yes, and this social control is also very important, because now at the moment I'm in Newcastle here, and yeah, last yeah, several days ago, some teenagers, they were just coming on the street and breaking windows. I think they were kind of like drunk or something like this. So there was no Birja to catch them and to say that it's a bad kind of behavior, you know. Like, so the social control, I think it's very important kind of function of Birja. And on the broader scale, I also of course agree that it's like a space and a kind of community of patriarchal values and so on and so on. But also there happened big discussions about the current economic problems of the city and of the society. And actually the Birja is kind of place of discussion where the truth is born, right? So I think it has this kind of special function that it is kind of small agora where the discussion goes on. And yeah, as far as yeah, the several discussions that I attended, they were really right to the point, and much more kind of to the point than, for example, discussions in the parliament. So, but also the parliament is also the space of patriarchal values, you know. So I think Birja, and also it is very dependent on what's happening outside. So I think if the society as a whole can emancipate itself, the Birja will change with itself, with the society, and with the environment. So still think that Birja has this kind of potential of producing the discussion and kind of like searching for the truth. So yeah, thank you.
And I think Kerry also had a comment about what Levan was talking about.
Yes.
No, Zhenya, it was Zhenya.
Okay, thank you. I would like to comment on what Kabatoni Betty has said previously, and what Batoni Livani has said just before. I think I can draw just one example from Russian context, an example of when locality gives becomes a basis of some political action. In Russia, where you know that any political action which is not connected to the United Russia Party is almost impossible nowadays. There is an example of political activity which we can find around new multi-story building blocks where people who are new dwellers of these houses, these communities, just first they communicate online, they create WhatsApp, Telegram groups just to fix their everyday problems like building playgrounds, building roads, and organizing the area where they live. But you know, there is only one step left before transferring of these communities into some politically active groups, because, for example, these groups become active in municipal elections. They can vote for their candidate if they know this person who is active in their group. So we have here we have an example how locality and locally based urban communities may become politically active. Of course, it is very far away from the way how birjas function today, for example, in Tbilisi or maybe in Kutaisi. But still, I think that there is a potential for transforming birjas in some kind of similar political action. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for comments. Now, Katie Sartani has a comment.
I'm a little bit confused, and I've decided to comment on this. Like, I want to share my confusion with you. That I don't see birjas that has that much potential of emancipation and political participation. Because if government is trying to control these birjas, it does not mean that this is a type of kind of political, this is an opportunity for political participation, and birjas are that unique and good and positive space or place for social, or for political reasons, or even cultural and social. What I'm saying is that birjas also have its negative aspects, and as a girl, as a woman, I would say it's also could be dangerous even today, because where I lived 5 years ago, in front of my building, there was a birja, and I always had to call my family members to pick me up because it was not that safe for me as a woman. And if government is, what I've heard today, like, according to your opinions, I have this impression that you see birjas as a future of political participation. I'm sorry if I'm exaggerating, but I have this impression, and I wanted to make sure if I'm correct or not, because, because I have these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. It's very important. Misha.
I think in terms of political participation, most important birja is Rustaveli in front of parliament, because it's always birja for political activities. Yeah, like birja for to protest and say something. So it's, I think in Tbilisi it's the most important place, birja as a political activity.
Thank you. Online, is there an online comment on one of these? Well, Levan and Constanza. So first Levan and then Constanza. But please keep it short, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Katie, I agree with you, and I don't think that it is like a main kind of space of the local participation. So, but it exists. So I wouldn't give it that much kind of like importance. But the fact is that it exists, and the fact is that it has a role in the elections. So that's only the fact that I wanted to mention.
And the next comment?
Yeah, thank you. I also agree with you, Katie, to a certain extent. But what I wanted to say is that according to people with whom I and other researchers did in interviews, there is also the opposite perception sometimes of the Birja that you were saying, which is connected to what Levani was saying about the control, the social control. And some people actually say that they feel safer because of Birja, because it's somehow this kind of mechanism of like spotting something strange, something unusual, something in the street, and some people, especially maybe older residents, I would say, of like both like women and men, they refer to Birja as this type of eyes on the street where you know, like they kind of are a familiar reality for the neighborhood, and they keep they watch around in order to make sure that things in the neighborhood are okay. That's what I heard at least. So there is also the other perception with respect to what you were saying about feeling unsafe.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we are out of time because we have time constraints. Thanks everybody for coming, and online and offline. I think it was a nice discussion. I would like to thank Katie for giving us their insights into the topics, and I would like to thank once again BIRZHASTATION group for letting us talk. It's I don't know if it's a Birja or not, this particular constellation. I don't think it is, but at least we talked about Birja. Maybe not on Birja, but I think it was rather about Birja. And when I said that, have you been to Birja? When I asked everybody, it was not just a question. I think maybe we will have a chance to go more to Birja later on, or maybe not. I don't know. It's up to you. So anyway, thank you all for coming, and we will see you soon. I think next week there is a next talk with Constanza, I think, yeah? So I would like to invite everybody to Constanza's talk. I stole some of her paper. I mean, I didn't steal, I referred to her, but I talked some from her paper, some from Zhenia's, but I think it's better to hear it from the first account. So I would like to invite everybody to Constanza's next week. Thank you. Bye.